An effective tutor is a tutor who makes the student feel more confident in their writing and enables the student to be more successful on their own. In other words, a tutor is not merely someone who corrects papers or gives students the correct answers, but encourages them to develop their own writing skills so that in the absence of the tutor, the student will consistently perform at a higher level. So when I tutor students, my goal is to help them develop a larger set of intellectual tools and skills so that they can be empowered and more confident in the academic writing that they have to do under any circumstances, regardless of whether or not I'm there to help them. When I have a tutoring session, my first priority is to make sure that I define the parameters for the assignment. And the reason why I do that is not simply to preserve my own time so that I don't waste a lot of time, but I want also to train the students to make sure that when they're writing, they always understand the assignment before they start writing about it, because in the future, when I'm not there to tutor them, I want them to be able to work on their assignment in a way that's productive, that they don't waste a lot of time if they're not confused about the instructions. Beyond that, I try to cater the session towards the student's needs. What I mean is that if a student is coming to the writing center, there's generally only two reasons why. Either they just simply want an extra credit slip, or they're legitimately in need of assistance with their assignment. And so, when a student comes into the writing center, I need to listen to what the student needs. So, I ask the student, what concerns do you have about your paper? And I focus on addressing those concerns and giving them feedback on those areas. I would say that out of any of the readings that we did in class, the one that had the biggest impact on my tutoring style was the one about working class students. The reason why is because a lot of the time when I was tutoring students, I felt like I tended to give some vague type of feedback, meaning that instead of telling the students this is the best way to do something, I would give them feedback more along the lines of, well, what works for you? What do you usually do? The reason why I feel like that's not always effective is simply because the students are looking for a way to improve their paper and they're new to writing. So when I say what usually works for you, a lot of the time the answer quite simply is, I've never done this before. You're the one that's in the writing center. What works? And what works for me may not work for every single student. So there is an extent to which you should be open to, or at least aware of, some different kinds of methods and writing styles. But in many cases, when a student comes into the writing center and asks how to do something, I tell them what I do, and they respond well to it. So that is, in many cases, a very useful strategy. I also think that because we're in an environment where many of the students are not native English speakers, when they come into the writing center, they see you as not only a writing center authority, but an English language authority. And what they want is direct feedback because they feel that you're the subject matter expert in the English language, which of course, we're not professionally trained as English teachers necessarily, but in any case, we have to make sure that when we're giving students feedback, we don't talk in circles and say things that are not practically useful. Students in many cases are simply trying to get direct feedback to either fulfill their assignment requirements or get direct feedback so that they can get the highest possible grade on their assignment. Now, there's a broader philosophical point about why students care about their GPA and whether or not their GPA matters, but that's beyond the scope of what I'm talking about. Because the point is that the tutors exist to serve the students and to help the students achieve their objectives. So if the objective of the student is simply to get a high score or just to pass the class, our job is to help them do that, not to do any other thing. So when a student comes into the writing center, I find that the most productive way to approach the session is to give them advice that's practical and actionable. For example, if a student comes into the writing center and says, "I'm having issues with brainstorming," the most useful thing for me to do is simply to show them how I do brainstorming. Not that I insist that they do things the same way that I do them, but telling the student, "Oh, there's different ways of doing things, let's try out 10 different ways of doing it," that may not be as useful. And it's also much less direct and will spend a lot more time. It's easier to just show them what I do and say, "Does that work for you? Does that make sense?" And they have to respond and be honest with me in order to have a productive session. But if it doesn't make sense to them, then of course I have to explore other avenues. When a student leaves the session, I want them to leave with something that they didn't come in with. I want them to leave thinking, okay, I know what to do next. The next step is defined well. Because if students aren't being adequately prepared to complete their own assignments, I feel that that defeats the purpose of them coming into the writing center in the first place. That has the dual function of helping the student improve as a writer, but it also allows them to take ownership over their presentation because the next step is defined for them, not necessarily for me because it's not my paper. When it comes to being inclusive and supportive in the writing center, I think it's important to be as unbiased as possible. Our campus has a lot of students who have a wide range of beliefs and ideas. So when a student comes into the writing center and they have some ideas of their own, it's not our place to insert our personal opinion, but simply to analyze what they've written and tell them whether or not it makes sense. In regards to how my personal background and identity shape my tutoring, I think that the main things are that I'm in my late 20s, I've been to college already, and I have a lot more life experience than the students that I'm tutoring. So I feel that in many cases, those experiences reveal themselves in the way that I discuss particular topics that students are writing about. In conclusion, my main goal when I'm tutoring students is to empower them so that when they leave the session, they feel like they have a better idea of how to complete the assignment than they did when they came in. If a student leaves the session and they don't feel that way, or they're more confused about what to do, then I feel that I've failed as a tutor. So when I'm having a session, I always try to hone in on what the student is doing that's already working, and I suggest to discard what's not working and giving power to the student so that they can do the rest on their own.